All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Bridging the Gap, the show where we, well, you know. And I'm here with a guy who legend has spoken of many times. You've heard stories about him. You've read the myths. But here he is, live in the flesh over the internet. I think we need to have a conversation. Mr. Cropper, thank you for joining us.
How we doing, Rucka?
Pretty good. Now, full disclosure, in the version of this conversation going on my channel, we are superimposed over a picture of some Jews and Arabs at the marketplace buying produce. And so I'm letting you know about this. This is not, I'm not mocking you. This is not a joke. This is an artistic decision. We've got a bird with a fig leaf in its mouth as well. So your recent video was called "Why Does Rucka Despise Mr. Cropper?" I think we need to have a conversation. I wrote down a couple points here, how we got to this point. So something that, well, okay, where do we even begin? So we had a conversation. Yeah, we had a talk. This was after you were, I guess, publicly feuding or publicly criticizing other objectivists. I didn't say, well, if you're criticizing them, you're no friend of mine. I said, sure, let's have a conversation. And I think during that conversation, I offered a little bit of insight for maybe it's based on a little bit of misunderstanding. But at no point would I push you away simply because you're beefing with others. And I guess I got a little bit upset in a conversation where you said that I distanced myself from you because you're moving away from ARI, or that you're critical of ARI. So I think maybe that's something I've been a little bit hung up on.
Okay. I think that my conversations with Onar seem to be a sort of pivot point for you.
No, absolutely. So I released I think 20-some minute video after watching your conversation with Onar. I had already been a little bit apprehensive, and I brought this up to you in our conversation. The way you use the term "oblectivist" seemed a little bit odd to me. And your political views obviously are not entirely my political views, or the application of objectivism to the current day political landscape. We are not the same. But still, that was no reason for me to hate on you or to push you away. I said, let's talk about this. Your conversation with Onar, I think, put you in a certain category in my mind where I said, okay, we are just so different that we're just on two very different paths. It's like we're speaking two different languages. We're talking about two different philosophies. But that was a 20-25 minute video where I thought I somewhat fairly and in a leveled way talked about why it is I think we're going in separate directions. And I linked people to your conversation with Onar so that they can watch for themselves. And did you have a problem with that video? Did you think I was misrepresenting you or being unfair?
I don't recall too much substantive content in the video. I probably would have done a reply to it. I mean, I don't see, maybe you can give me a sentence of what you object to about Onar.
Well, so this was the this was the video I did that you reacted to last week, a few days ago, with your 90 minutes of response to me. So then this was before the funny comedy video with the alt-right and the Nickelback. This was before that. So this was a day or two before that. I want to talk about kind of what happened to get us to this stage, and then maybe we can talk about actual philosophy. I didn't think that video that I did was unfair. I was in contact with you via DMs on Twitter, and I even told you when you released the video then about the alt-right and sort of it seemed like kind of calling out Charles too for how he was characterizing the alt-right. You come off in that video as someone who just hasn't really been paying close attention for the last few years. And yeah, it was a little bit, I guess, mean-spirited, as comedy can sometimes be. But I told you directly, I said, I'm working on this. It's kind of too funny for me not to do. I hope you take it as a joke. I told you this. As soon as it came out, you told me, both in comments and in DM, yes, that's hilarious. So I see no reason at this point in the chronology why, why you should be insulted if like we're in contact and we seem to be getting along fine, even with our differences of opinion. So I was a little bit thrown off a day or two later when you were talking to somebody else, and you said something to the effect of that I'm probably distancing myself from you because you're critical of ARI or that you're different from ARI. I thought that was I felt a little bit set up by that because I was willing to talk to you. I did talk to you. And here I am kind of poking fun at something that I think needs to be addressed, and it just seems like the more I tell you, here's what's been happening on the right. There is a move towards the identitarian side of things. You can call them leftists, but they're on the right, and they're somewhat different than the leftists. They are a different type of variant of identitarianism. They're on the right. They are working alongside people on the right. And the way you're talking about the alt-right in this video brings an opportunity for me to kind of make this funny video. So I guess from my point of view, I understand that a lot of my jokes could come off like very hateful or mean-spirited, but I guess from my point of view, I thought we were having this real cool open communication, and then to hear you say that I was pushing you away to signal to the objectivist movement, I guess I took that a little bit hard because that's not me. I do things my way, and if the objectivists like what I do and they want to get on board with that, great. But I take my integrity rather seriously. It's important to me that my audience know that I'm on this journey and I'm going to be honest with them.
Well, one thing that I was a little taken aback by, I listened to this Talking Ideas and Playing DK Country 2 with Kirk and James, and I keep coming up again and again. I'm the elephant in the room, but I'm only sneered at and laughed about and dismissed.
I don't think that's true. I agree that I was bringing you up a number of times. I think the reason for that, again, remember, this is a niche philosophy. There's very few people out there talking, and just a few days ago, you released 90 minutes of rebuttal to me. So obviously, you're going to be on my mind when I'm talking to two objectivists on a channel with a largely objectivist audience. You're going to come up. I don't think that in itself is should be a surprise. But then I don't think I was really sneering at you. I think I was bringing up some of the things you've said and kind of where we disagree. And I could see why some of it comes off a little bit overly dismissive or mean-spirited. And then again, this is why I wanted to have this conversation now. Okay, it's kind of there may be a little bit of a gap in sort of our cultural familiarity with this type of thing. I watch a lot of videos on the internet, and I keep up with a lot of people on the internet. You know, people like Sargon and kind of the younger side of the intellectual dark web. They sort of poke fun at one another. They call each other out when they disagree. It typically is not based on animus. It typically is just kind of, here's an opportunity to both highlight our disagreement as well as entertain. So, look, I mean, it was never my intention to cause you any grief, and I don't want to cause anybody grief. I do find that video funny, though, the one with the Nickelback, and I thought you found it funny as well. But I know you just brought up the conversation about ideas, the video called Ideas and Donkey Kong 2. Do you remember offhand something that I said that seemed like I was just sneering at you without...
Yeah, we need an intellectual leader, and Cropper's the bus driver.
Okay, now this is something you've said repeatedly, calling yourself the bus driver. Even if I thought you were qualified to lead the community around this philosophy, even if I thought you were the guy, I would still bring up the bus driver because it's a funny way to put it, and it's a meme at this point. Look, if I really thought you were so irrelevant, obviously I wouldn't talk about you. It's funny, the bus driver point. Again, I think things like this could be misunderstood. I understand. It's not like I've never misunderstood when someone was joking, and I get it. But the bus driver point is, it was a little bit mean, I guess. I don't want to. I don't want to have any bad blood.
What if Mr. Cropper was the elephant in the room during that conversation, and you guys are sitting there saying, we need an elephant? What if we just had an elephant?
An elephant.
I mean, that's what the intellectual leader you need, right?
Right.
I mean, I'm just making an analogy. Don't carry it too far. But I was the elephant in the room during the conversation. It seems like we need somebody who doesn't care what other people think about their opinion. They're just out there to say what's right.
No, I mean, when it comes to saying what you want to say, I don't think you take orders from anyone. I don't think you hold anything back, and I like to think I'm the same way. That doesn't mean I'm the leader. Look, so this is why I wanted to kind of discuss our backlog together before we jump right into substance. I wanted to kind of give you more of an idea of what this has all looked like from my perspective. So I knew of you vaguely. One or two of your videos over the years had popped up and I'd seen, and I've always thought, okay, here's a guy who knows objectivism. He's not around anymore. You came back to YouTube, and I thought, this guy is pretty good. Seems to know history, know philosophy. I liked the way you went after Mr. Armstrong for his critique of the objectivist ethics. And I said, okay, you're not necessarily the most accomplished philosopher on the planet today, the most accomplished objectivist. There's quite a few scholars still around, but I definitely thought, okay, it's definitely good to have you around. And then, like I said, seeing some of the developments made me a little bit disillusioned and really disappointed. We can discuss what those things were, but I wanted to give you that context. For me, this was kind of a disappointing process. So it wasn't coming from like kind of wanting to knock you down. It wasn't coming from wanting to embarrass you in any way.
You're disappointed in the developments and the direction.
I don't want you to be an elephant in the room, and I don't want you to think that I'm motivated by anything negative. You've repeatedly compared yourself to Charles too, saying that you were excited, kind of motivated by seeing his success, I guess financially on Patreon, and wanting to emulate that. And then you made a video a few days ago or a week ago saying that all of the people supporting Charles, or the bulk of them, are just my fans who are supporting Charles because I told them to. I don't think that's true. I think, I don't know, like, do you not think Charles is a remarkable intellect? I mean, I have my differences with the guy, but I mean, the guy is unusually sharp when it comes to understanding and explaining philosophy. Do you not happen to see him that way?
Yeah, but what baffled me was the demand for highly objectivist content. That's still what baffles me, and I still dismiss it as some of those people, at least some of those people, were not objectivists.
I don't know if some of them were. It's hard for me to imagine why a non-objectivist would be so impressed by Charles. I mean, I guess a few of them might just be people who have some overlap with him, but I think largely who he attracted were the same audience you're trying to reach. I think some of the people that I reach, people that are already on board with objectivism and are hungry for something like Peikoff used to deliver, something like, Binswanger still delivers, obviously behind a paywall. So before we even get to politics, I long for the days, before we talk about immigration or guns or any of that, I long for the days of objectivists being sharp and speaking in terms of essentials. So I was enjoying your content. You were doing this Kant book study. I was with you on that. I definitely got excited seeing you go after Armstrong, but a certain number of developments made me a little bit disillusioned, and I brought those things up to you directly when we spoke, and then I followed up saying, look, here's what I've learned since then. Here's what I've sort of figured out about Cropper. I don't hate Cropper, but here's kind of my appraisal at this point, and there it is. And then I saw you kind of continuing down this path that was sort of that was making me disillusioned when you were reacting to Charles and talking about the alt-right. It's like I keep trying to tell you, and other people telling you too, there is an identitarian surge on the right. I agree with you that at the end of the day, these are all leftists fighting one another. These are all, modern philosophers at war. I get it, but it's happening among conservatives. They are cozier with identitarians and group thinkers than I would like to think, and they're explicitly opposed to the left. I think Stefan Molyneux is a great example of this. He's very critical of the left. He regards the left as the most dangerous thing around today. But he's not, and so he hates the left. He's out to beat the left. But he's really, really into race. And I'm not just talking about his bell curve beliefs. That part doesn't really offend me. And I think, it doesn't offend me. I disagree with it, I think, but that's not where I come strongly. It's the way he talks about groups like it's the bottom line. And that's kind of the impression I get, kind of listening to you and Onar. It's like, you really think that genetics are a serious, okay, let's talk about this, I guess. So I'm not just having a conversation with myself. So I never called you racist. You said that I implied you're racist.
Okay.
What makes you say that I implied that you're racist, or even that Onar is racist? What did I say?
You said we reject the genetic blank slate, and you said I'm associating with racists.
I didn't say genetic blank slate. I think I said the blank slate, but referring to the content, ideas, right? Okay. So saying that you deviated from objectivism is not implying that you're racist. Incidentally, I think the mistake you're making does lead you down a path that takes us to eugenics and all types of bad ideas and bad things, but that is not what I said about you. It's not what I said about him.
Let's say these things are real. Let's say it's true that these things are facts. How would talking about them automatically lead us down the road to eugenics? Unless, that's determinism. You're talking like a determinist. Like, if we look at this evidence, we're automatically going to open up gas chambers.
Well, again, I didn't bring up where this is taking us.
Eugenics.
I didn't bring up the gas chamber. So I didn't imply that you're racist. I simply said I see you being swept away by this, what I consider to be basic bitch pseudoscience. And I don't think this is objectivism. I think objectivism is here to just kind of fill the blanks when you're done listening to just mainstream intellectuals. The thing that irks me, I realize now, the thing that bothered me so much about you saying that I pushed you away to suck up to ARI is that I think most objectivists today are too much like how I see you. They're too easily swept away by Jordan Peterson, and they take Dave Rubin so seriously. So like that, from my point of view, you're the one you and the objectivists are all taking the IDW super seriously and really, really going with the mainstream. So then to hear you say that I'm the one going with all of them was a little bit off-putting.
It is a bit everybody pointing at everybody.
It is, yeah, absolutely. It certainly seems that way.
Well, I was hated on and blocked by Amy Peikoff, the famous and only.
I had nothing to do with that, and I still spoke to you, and I looked for clarity, and that's what we're doing today. I'm looking for clarity, and what more can I do?
All right, so my objective view of the IQ thing is, if you were to set up some sort of legal system where you had a minimum of IQ, and we had so we recognized IQ is important, what you'd end up with is 50 million white people in the United States being on the lower tier, and there would be 3 million blacks above them. So if we sort it out racially, and people like Stefan Molyneux think that the whites are above the blacks, that's not true. We're going to have tens of millions of whites below blacks. So the overlap in the bell curve shows us that sorting it out through statistics isn't going to do us any good. You're still going to have dumb as rocks white people and brilliant Nobel laureates among the black people. So it just does no good. You're going to have dumb Jews. Even though they're smarter than average, you're going to have dumb Jews. So
I know it.
It does no good. So what we need to do is have a conversation about what these statistics mean and what we can use them for.
So here's an example of where I think you're responding to things I didn't say. And shortly after my video came out, you had a conversation with Anner, and you sarcastically introduced him and said, oh, here he is, the Nazi, the genetic determinist, all these things that I never said. I never said that. And I never, like I said a few minutes ago, the race and IQ thing doesn't bother me. I'm not offended by the idea that certain groups have a higher capacity for intellect than other groups. It makes no difference to me. What matters to me is that philosophically we're airtight. So my issue is accepting the data that comes from studies that don't control for all the important variables. We can just throw those studies in the trash, in my opinion. Let me put it this way. If I were to grab a Germanic barbarian from the days of Rome and give him an IQ test and try to test his capacity for, how much he's capable intellectually, he would look very stupid, obviously. Grab a German from more recent time, I'm assuming the Germanic barbarians are related to today's Germans or whatever, grab that same race of person in modern times, and they would score much higher. So it is philosophy that makes all the difference. It is the exposure to ideas, and we're all exposed to many, many different philosophical influences today. I think most people are what Rand would call having a kind of mongrel philosophy, right? Just like an assortment of random things. Random is the wrong word, but of many different things that many of them conflict with one another. So my issue was never with even citing statistics of which group performed better than others. My problem was with accepting data that tests human beings without controlling for all the variables. And the most important variable that nobody today, outside of objectivism, nobody today thinks is even relevant is philosophy. So to see you, the objectivist, the guy who teaches objectivism on YouTube, to be accepting these studies and you seem to be swallowing them, I felt very disillusioned, and I felt like, okay, we are clearly going in very different directions. So we're still just talking about philosophy here. We haven't even gotten anywhere close to politics.
Accepting and swallowing the studies.
I apologize.
You're all right.
Okay.
You say accepting and swallowing the studies. I mean, so what? The bell curve? Mr. Murray's bell curve?
I haven't read the bell curve, and like I said, I don't mind. I don't have a problem with the idea that some groups are more gifted than others in various ways. Some people are taller than other people. I don't have a problem with that fact. And like you point out, men and women are different, right? Men, like you say most murders are committed by men. I would say yes, most murders, most inventions, men and women seem to be very different. So I'm not here saying the blank slate means that everything's a social construct. What I am saying is we need to control for philosophy. You cannot take a group of black people in the United States, given the history of philosophy and the history of ideas that they've been largely instructed by their own intellectuals as well as mainstream ones. You can't really know what this group or what a single person is capable until you've controlled for the influence of philosophy. So look, if I came across you talking to Anna or somewhere and I didn't know you had any proximity to objectivism, I would just move on. I wouldn't hate you. I wouldn't call you racist. I would say, oh, these guys, they're missing what I think is the most important factor, which is philosophy. But oh well. But the fact that you're an objectivist, the fact that you're here to kind of drive the bus, but I can't even rely on you to protest when this type of study is posed, was very disappointing to me. So, I mean, here we are. This is not based on hatred. This is not based on wanting to embarrass you or make fun of you. It is my opinion that we have very, very different applications of philosophy to the real world, and that's what it's all about, isn't it?
So philosophy is the ultimate mover.
Yeah.
Is it the only mover?
It's the most important one.
It's the fundamental mover. It moves history.
It is the essential. If the philosophy of objectivism became prominent, if most intellectuals were informed by it and the culture came to reflect that, then sure, we can put people in groups and figure out which one of them are performing better in various ways. That might be interesting, but we're living in a world where scientists don't believe human beings are conscious, right? Like Sam Harris doesn't believe in free will. I don't take these people seriously, and I'm sure I'm sure they have plenty to offer. I've heard that quantum mechanics provides us with some valuable formulas, but I don't take seriously people that don't recognize free will and the influence of ideas.
You
So that's
propose
where,
that the African American population has been educated partly or largely by their own intellectuals?
both their intellectuals are informed by the mainstream intellectuals. Right, the black leaders all went to college. So if for those of you that haven't heard it, check out Peikoff's Ford Hall forum about O.J. Simpson. I'm not entirely on board with everything Peikoff says about how a legal system should be run. He seems like it's complicated. He was saying like he doesn't think defense attorneys should defend someone they believe to be guilty. I think Peikoff was reacting a little bit emotionally to the very upsetting verdict of OJ, but I digress. I find his walkthrough of Black history and of history in the United States very interesting. It's possible he made a mistake here and there, but what the picture he paints is that this group of people, obviously brought from a very, very uncivilized continent, brought for many generations, are enslaved. Still then, even after slavery, even after much of Jim Crow, they're still going with the program. They're still trending upwards. They're still moving towards individualism. And then what do we see in the 50s and 60s? We see a move towards collectivism. We see the left taking the legitimate issue of racism and marrying it to this postmodernism, this nihilism of saying, that anyone who's at an advantage, anyone with privilege should be punished for it.
Marxism, I think.
Sure, Marxism, absolutely. I mean, you know a lot more philosophy than me. It sounds like Marxism, and I believe it is. So, but I mean, I do look at all these topics by referencing my own introspection, my own history of ideas. My journey as I've gone through from the religious era to the atheist era, then the falling into skepticism, leading into nihilism. My inner world has been like the history of Western civilization, hopefully indicating that Western civilization will land on objectivism. But yeah, that's how when we talk about groups and IQ and all that, I'm not offended. How dare you say one group has a higher IQ than the other? What I'm saying is we should not accept data that is conducted by scientists that are without philosophy, that are without an understanding of human nature.
Well, what do you propose we say about the massive disparity in violence and crime in the black and the white communities in America? That all comes back to philosophy and teachers and so on. Then why have they grouped up and accepted their own little group of teachers and philosophers and studied their own group? Do you think that just there's a default to tribalism that we see? Unless people are taught to think for themselves, they'll just default to the group or something?
I think blacks were explicitly told and have been and still are told to be tribal. That is the one moral certainty in our ridiculous culture today. I think the one thing that virtually everyone seems to agree on in the mainstream culture is that blacks should build their community. If you're a young black man, you give back. Be part of a community. Some of them hate the white man more than others. Some conservatives say, hey, don't blame the white man. But everyone virtually agrees that blacks need to see themselves as part of a group and build up their community. And that's not the message that most white people grow up with. There is way too much collectivism. There's way too much guilt and altruism and all of that. I'm not exactly championing mainstream white, regular American culture. But to me, the way the message blacks are told by their own leaders as well as mainstream intellectuals, they have no option. I mean, there's nothing on the menu other than tribalism unless they're listening to me.
Right. So we have to give a special amount of credit to Thomas Sowell and Candace Owens and blacks like that who break out and break away from it.
I'm a little more cynical about Candace Owens, and probably if I investigated Sowell further, I would also grow a little bit disappointed. But even Candace Owens is saying, blacks, we need to build our community. How about individualism? I see that nowhere. What happened to individualism? Frederick Douglass, he named himself after a Scottish poem, a character in a Scottish poem. Does that sound like something Malcolm X would do? Does that sound like something, black empowered people would do? pick a proper name from a Scottish poem. No, he was inspired by the Enlightenment. Look, obviously, this is a fascinating conversation. I wanted to. I'm happy to keep talking to you right now, but I wanted to clarify that kind of where my position is. I was not trying to punish you for, deviating from ARI or deviate. It is my opinion, based on my understanding of objectivism, that you're sort of going about things the wrong way. And again, we still haven't even come close to politics, where we also have many differences. But to my credit, I hope you agree that this is to my credit, I was still interested in talking to you, even though I knew of those political differences, because politics are not where the battle is. I thought we were on the same page as far as philosophy and the nature of man, and I'm not sure that's the case.
Well, why do you think you're proposing that even Candace Owens and Thomas Sowell are sort of collectivist? Why do you think collectivism is so attractive to the black community then?
It's on the menu that most people are shown in life. Individualism, like real individualism, is scarcely there, or a certain type of individualism. Yeah, we like the entrepreneur, we kind of like the success story, but ultimately it's like Euron always says, at a lifetime achievement banquet, they speak for 1 minute about their business accomplishments and 9 minutes about all the charity that they've done. So that's everywhere. You see that everywhere. You see that among the Jews for sure, the biggest, model minority next to the Asians. And there also, you've got all these expectations to give back, to donate hospitals, to donate this, to build, to give back to the community, which is why you see guilt, why you see unhappy people, even though they've been successful, because their philosophy conflicts with what they're actually, the way they're living, the fact they're pursuing the almighty dollar, but philosophically they still hold altruism as the ideal. Tribalism is attractive. I mean, I think you made this point the other day in responding to me, that when people don't have the right philosophy, they sort of default to tribalism.
Yeah, I think black people are really afraid to step outside of or believe anything that's not part of the community group thing. And it's really easy to identify, maybe because they're 13% of the population, they have to group up a little more than white people. Maybe it's because it's so easy to identify them, who they are, and the clothes and the music they listen to and the styles and stuff. Maybe there's some sort of inherent coherence to their collectivity that makes it more difficult to get out of it. But you're proposing that even Thomas Sowell and Candace Owens and so on aren't out of it. They are collectivists. Is there any black intellectual, Sheriff David Clark? Is there any black intellectual that's not collectivist?
Listen. I can say that Thomas Sowell is not part of the problem. I can tell you he is not what's wrong with the world. But again, the reason we have philosophy at all is so that we can get it right. So that Thomas Sowell doesn't cede the moral high ground to Al Sharpton. See what I'm saying?
Well, what's wrong with the black community? Yeah. Why are they so violent?
Again, they need philosophy just like everybody else.
Do they have a particularly bad philosophy? Must be much worse than the people around them.
It appears to be that in the postmodern lesson plan, the blacks have been championed as those who are perpetually victims, and that their moral calling is to be tribal and be collectivistic. So they have basically been told that to be individualistic is to act white, to suck up, to kiss the boot of the white man, is to be a sellout. So they've been told. And look, I know it could sound like I'm dismissing free will. It could sound like I'm saying nobody black is responsible for his actions. No, I'm just saying when we study human beings, we need to control for the influence of philosophy. It is my understanding is that blacks were performing better than a lot of their white counterparts before the 50s and 60s, maybe even as late as the 60s, but before the the riots and that whole era.
Yeah, and the switch around to the modern Marxist view of the civil rights era, the war on poverty, all of that stuff has set them back.
The war on drugs, absolutely. And again, people need philosophy, and drugs are serious business as well. Drugs are serious business. It's very difficult to grow up in a household where your parents are on drugs or absent, and the people around you are offering you drugs when you're barely walking. I mean, drugs are serious business. So, again, if we were able to control for philosophy, and then it turned out that one race of people is just somehow more equipped to living on Earth than the others, I'm not going to cry about it. I don't care. I'm concerned with individuals. But I do take issue with seeing objectivists eating up the studies coming out of irrational, academia, irrational scientists who may have some good points, they may have some good findings, but ultimately, like I said, they don't take philosophy seriously. They don't think ideas are an important factor. And when I see you talking to Anna and it's sounding like he's saying, and that you're somewhat agreeing or wholly agreeing that political views are also shaped by genetics. I mean, what am I supposed to do with that?
Well, I don't know what you mean by that, but if philosophy is important at all, then it's important because it's in competition with something else. So, but I don't know what you mean by political views are shaped by genetics. If Onar said such things, I can't own those.
Didn't he say? Well, let's make sure we're not misrepresenting him right now, or that I'm not misrepresenting. Didn't he say that liberal and conservative ultimately are a spectrum between autism and psychosis?
Yeah, I think that was just a way of describing which I think is a pretty good way of describing it. Psychotic people have no boundaries in their mind, and autistic people have too many boundaries.
Okay, so now we're looking at people's philosophies and saying that those philosophies are the product of their genetic predisposition. So what do we need objectivism for? What do we need philosophy for at all if genetics are doing the picking for us?
To tell us how to live. Genetics aren't doing the picking for us.
How can I make that decision? How can I choose how to live when my autism or psychosis have already determined what political view I'm going to have?
Yeah, or the fact that you're male or female has already determined how violent you are. Then how can you think for yourself after you were either born a male or a female? How could you ever think for yourself?
No, I don't think those are the same, and I don't think men are inherently more violent. They're more, yes, they're more likely to be violent sans a rational philosophy, but in the presence of a rational philosophy, you could see it may even be possible that more violence is committed by women. It's hard for me to say, but we
don't have any evidence for that. We have lots of evidence that men are violent.
Fine. But within a certain context, we see them acting violently. If we got the culture the way that we wanted to, if we understood objectivism and explained it, and it happened to spread, and it began to influence the culture the way other philosophies have influenced the culture, I think violence would become kind of almost unseen because most people would be very rational, very focused. So the fact that on sort of a primal level, men are more prone to violence wouldn't really matter. I think the men are also naturally more protective, right? That like men want to protect women. So the fact that men are the kind of physical gender, the physical sex, doesn't necessarily mean violence. It just means we're the ones who like to lift things up and build things and protect. It doesn't mean we're like, anyway. So now you're saying, okay, so if we have these differences, then
philosophy is what we use to live in this world, but we do find ourselves in this world.
No, I agree. I agree we find ourselves in this world, but
we find ourselves in a world where 1.3 billion Chinese can live in close proximity to each other in relative peace, and Europeans are in constant warfare, and Africa can't even build a goddamn city. They can't even, like ours
are in warfare.
Yeah, Europe, right up to the present day, is in constant warfare among their nation. We've stopped it since World War II, but it's only because the American boot's been, over the whole thing.
Then why did the Europeans living in America, right? The average American is of German or British descent. Why are we going out? Why aren't we jumping into Europe and fighting, or why aren't we fighting with Canada? When you look at the differences between the Chinese and the Europeans, I think you're skipping over a lot of variables. I mean, the Chinese people living on the west coast of America they're not exactly the way the people are in China, right?
Right. Yeah, that shows the importance of philosophy. You bring. Sorry, my alarm goes off there.
That's all right.
You bring you bring everybody to America and give them, just say you do what you want on your own, and people become immensely wealthy and powerful. But if they're just stuck in a tribe, then they behave in a tribal way. Now, the tribal way in China seems to be for everybody to keep their head down and just go along with the background rules. And Japan, that seems, and India. That's why they got so many people. You get a bunch of people together in Europe and you got a war on your hands. People start fighting. Most recently in the Caucasus and Albania and you know, I mean, it's very recent, even back in the 90s, very recent. They are still fighting in Europe, and they can build something. Europeans build things.
Uh-huh. So the way I interpret what you're saying is I'm seeing Asians, whether they're Indian or Chinese, I'm seeing them largely influenced by certain philosophical influences, and the Eastern philosophies, if we can call them that, are very different from the influence of people in the West. We also see differences in Europe over time. There are periods when the Europeans are building beautiful things, and there are periods when the Europeans are not. Obviously, there's the Dark Ages, etc. There are periods when the Europeans are more violent than others. So when I look at the world, I see ideas. You know, Kanye West sees music. He says, "I see ideas everywhere." I don't get if this is the way you see it. If you see it as Asians and Europeans are fundamentally different on a level deeper than just the influence of philosophy, then what does objectivism even? You're saying objectivism should just it could still kind of bring us all to a better place. Even though we have these genetic differences. Is that what you're saying?
It sets you free of the tribalism.
Sorry, hold on, the audio cut out again, sorry. All right.
It sets you free of the tribalism. Objectivism sets you free of it, so you don't have to think in groupthink. You're not limited to just what the group says or does. So, yeah, it erases all of it. But we can't ignore that without objectivism, these people do just accept the culture around them. Now, it seems to me the culture in the East, in the Orient, is less violent and less aggressive. And in Europe, it's a medium amount of aggression, and in Africa, it's maximum aggression.
Again, I don't know how you can. I don't know how you can be a student of objectivism and informed by objectivism and still look at these different cultures and see the difference as not like heavily philosophical. So how do you explain the difference between like Japan post-war and pre-war, right? It's like they might as well be two different species the way they behaved before the war and since.
Oh, well, since the war, we've had our boot on them. America's
really? So we lift our boot, and the Japanese, or if the Japanese here in California, if the Japanese or in any city and around the world, anywhere, the Japanese will devolve back into invading China and raping them if America takes our hand off of them?
The ones in America, I don't know, I couldn't say about that. People seem to become individualists in America, and they don't care about the group anymore.
And that's the influence of our founding philosophies. Even if at this point the founding fathers are just ghosts floating around, unidentified, the spirit of individualism still seems to be here. So like you said, it's individualism is what seems to take hold. So why aren't Americans behaving like Europeans? If you see Europeans as more violent, and you see genetics as important, why aren't the Americans of European descent behaving the same way?
Oh, I think, we've got our school shootings and stuff like that, right?
So that's how you interpret school shootings. That's just like we need to have some violence, and it just kind of surfaces when a teenager or somebody.
We're not going to do away with school shootings. If we do, then there will be school stabbings. So, like they've got in China.
So I will offer you that I think things like the school shootings and other acts of violence without a clear motivation are the consequence of our philosophical direction, and which most influential in the education system, the way people are educated. I think it's no coincidence that it's the school that they want to shoot up. That's where they were made so frustrated and confused. So I think we're seeing nihilism expressed. You know, up until the day of the shooting, this teenager heard everyone say that everything's subjective. There's no objective standard to anything. Morality is just a social construct. Then he shoots up everybody, and then suddenly for one day we hear people saying, this is evil, this is evil, this is objectively wrong, this is happening in objective reality, this is evil. But, within a couple of days, we're back to the nihilistic norm. So that's how I interpret school shooting.
Yeah, I'm sure there are different motives. ADV China does a video about the stabbings in China's schools, and he thinks that the reason they attack children is because they're the most helpless members of society, and they can do the most damage to them the quickest. So maybe he's got something there. I don't know, because it's a wider phenomenon, and it's happening in Europe. You take a truck and you drive down a sidewalk full of people, and
wasn't that a jihad? Wasn't that part of the Muslim?
Well, it's wherever you can do the most damage to the most people the quickest. It's our modern nihilist culture.
I thought the truck driving on the sidewalk was a jihad.
Yeah, I think jihad is Marxism. I think jihad is Kantian Marxism. So
there we go. See, this is the cropper that I like. This is the cropper who says, trace it back. Mm-hmm. Trace it back. So it's not about Arab or Persian or anyone's genetics per se. We can have Steve Jobs inventing beautiful things in America while his relatives in Syria are joining ISIS. It's ideas that make all the difference. So given that, I don't understand how you can continue to look at different countries and different groups of people as being driven by their genetics when there's nobody today other than, like I said in my conversation recently, other than the Bushmen in The Gods Must Be Crazy, other than tribesmen secluded from all external influences, living thousands of years in the past, other than those people, we're all living under Kant's umbrella. We're all influenced by Marx or Kant or Jesus or Aristotle. We are all walking around. These philosophers walk amongst us. So to emphasize genetics and to accept studies that are coming out in today's intellectual landscape, to me, it seems like you're not really understanding how objectivism applies to understanding people.
Well, objectivism says that it offers a philosophy for living on Earth, but it offers it to people who are born in a certain way, and we're born in a certain way. Now, if I'm right that the Orient is slightly less violent, and then we would have to give some reason for example, Mao and the killing of 60 million people and all this stuff. And of course, he was educated in France. He was a Marxist. So you'll find that with Pol Pot as well. You'll find with Osama bin Laden, educated in Riyadh by a guy from London. Again and again, you'll find Karl Marx at the base of the violence in the modern world.
Exactly. So why is it that when it comes to Mao Zedong, you see the influence of philosophy, but when it comes to the average Charlie walking around Chinatown, pardon the street lingo I'm using, you see him as basically just defaulting to his genetic predisposition when philosophy is everywhere, when all of us are influenced by the philosophers of the ages.
Well, I don't say genetics is everything. You bring a African American to America and they accept the culture, then they can be Thomas Sowell or Candace Owens. So philosophy is the end thing, but clearly there's a difference between the 1.3 billion people in China and the 400 million people in sub-Saharan Africa.
The impression I get from listening to you and Homeboy talk about this topic is that you take genetics way more seriously. There's not clearly an important difference between the sub-Saharans and the Chinese. The nature of every human being, of anyone who's part of the species and is not mentally retarded, we all have the same requirements for living, and we all follow philosophy, even if it's implicit, even if it's never been named. We are all influenced by ideas, and we follow them. You can definitely make the case that the Americans today are on a much better place philosophically than, let's say, Syria, for instance. And so you might make the case then, okay, close the borders until we solve this. Close the borders until Americans accept a better philosophy and a better political system. You make that point, I understand that point, but what I don't understand is actually focusing on genetic differences as though they're significant, as though they're important. I think in a recent video, in your recent rebuttal to me, you said we might want to not let people from a more violent culture or a more violent race or something. We might not want to let more violent people in. But I think whatever violence we do see, we're seeing people lacking in the right philosophy.
Well, if I say we don't want more violent people in, then we should only let Chinese people in, according to that line of thinking. No white people should be let into our country from here on out, because white people seem to be more violent than the Orient. So
I think I get the point you're trying to make, but I've never said you're pro-white and that you're a white supremacist. So again, seeing you and Onar kind of mocking me that way when I never said that, I am taking issue with the emphasis on genetics.
Well, see, I don't know where I'm emphasizing genetics. I'm emphasizing philosophy. I'm saying that philosophy hangs on a background of reality. And part of the reality is an extreme amount of violence in Africa, a medium amount of violence in Europe, and very little violence in the Orient, unless you import Marxism. That seems like a background truth. And what do we think about that? Nothing, because if we educate them, then it disappears?
Well, I would settle for just you and me understanding objectivism. But to see genetics as the major player just doesn't make sense to me. Like I don't know how you can study objectivism and introspect and still look at all these various peoples around the world in today's flat world, in today's globalist, global economy and global communication that we have, and see the way people are behaving and say that genetics are still driving the car when the people in Laos are way different than the people in Singapore, for instance, aren't they? Based on Tropic Thunder, based on the movie.
I don't have any idea what you're talking about. Singapore's a bunch of immigrants. A lot of immigrants in Singapore. So,
yeah, I guess the point I was making is you see very well-behaved. I mean, obviously the Asians are called the model minority, very well-behaved, sometimes stereotyped as being subservient, and then go to Laos and it's brutal and violent. Or again, anyway. I think we've discussed this topic. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not entirely sure if I understand you. So you're saying. I mean, we agree that philosophy is ultimately the solution. Philosophy is what all people all around the world, if they have a conceptual faculty, then they need philosophy and the philosophy for living on Earth, objectivism.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. All right. Now, I still disagree with the studies that come up with these statistics, because I think these studies are conducted by people that don't recognize the influence of philosophy. That's all I'm saying. That doesn't mean I'll reject any study for the rest of time. It means I don't trust today's psychologists and today's intellectuals, scientists that are studying human beings, because they are lacking philosophy. They don't understand the importance of philosophy. That's what I'm saying. So again, I don't hate you. I don't hate Anar. I don't turn to you for objectivist insight when I see you kind of taking these genetic explanations as seriously as you seem to be.
Well, if it's philosophy or genetics that causes the black community to be so violent in America today, which one is it? If it's philosophy, then why are they so insulated in their philosophy? That's tribalism then. If it's not philosophy, then it's some sort of genetic tribalism.
No, so I think it is. I think philosophy is the most important actor in all cultures today. Whether it's black, white, everyone.
How does the black community keep their philosophers so utterly separate from the rest of the culture? Why have they read those particular thinkers and believed them, and now they're acting on them, and now black culture is extremely violent? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying blacks and whites, intellectuals in America today agree with one another, and their application of their philosophy again, like I said, they take the legitimate issue of historical racism and they marry it to these horrible Marxist ideas. And as a result, we now live in a culture where the expectation of how blacks should think, how they should behave, the message given to blacks, the menu presented to them is a different menu than most white people are presented with. White people are told, feel guilty, but, chase the American dream if you like. Black people are told you are part of a race and that is the essence of who you are, and your moral calling is to give back to this shitty community you're growing up in, and that to do otherwise is to act white and to sell out. So that's the impression I get. That's what I picked up from living 30 some years. I could be wrong about the concretes of what's happening around us, but that's how I interpret what I see, because I do see philosophy as the most important actor. And the solution is philosophy.
So the violence and backwardness of the African American community in America is due to ideas, bad ideas.
And the backwardness of much of the Middle East. Look, in Israel, you have people of Middle Eastern descent behaving very differently from the ones in Iraq, from the ones in Syria, from the ones in North Africa. Ultimately, philosophy makes all the difference.
Why do you think they are so susceptible to these wrong ideas? Why don't more of them think a little harder and see through these bad ideas?
Why doesn't everybody entertain better ideas? I'm not trying to imply that blacks and whites in America today believe different philosophies. I'm saying the way that today's modern egalitarianism is applied is to put blacks and whites in different categories, to tell them to see things in a different way. So if you're white, you're basically racist, and it's all kind of your fault. So, feel bad. And you also see, by the way, the way I interpret the sort of downfall of the white man, right? The grown men living in their parents' basement, the gamers who sit around in the basement hating women behind their back and indulging in all this MGTOW this. And again, they take the legitimate issue of anti-man policies in our culture, but they marry it to Marxism. They marry it to all types of bad ideas. So I also see the sort of the crisis among white people, the opioid crisis, all these problems around us, I see as nihilism manifesting. I point school shooters who often tend to be white or Asian. I point to nihilism in the education system and in the culture, as it's expressed in media, in classrooms, as it's expressed in households often. I look at all these different problems and I say genetics are the last thing to worry about. Philosophy is the difference between us living in the age of reason or living in the future of the book Anthem.
Genetics are the last thing for us to worry about.
I think so. I've seen no indication of the opposite, because I know from my own inner world and I know from people I've observed that philosophy can make such an incredible difference. And I mean, not just other people I know. I'm saying I'm looking at the history of man. I'm looking at the history of man and I'm seeing philosophy at work.
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest disparity I could point out, we can point out disparities of 10 and 20% crime rate and IQ and stuff. The biggest disparity I could point out is the difference in violence between men and women. And I see no difference in the need for philosophy between men and women, even though we are very, very different as far as tools and warlike and empathy for other people and all that stuff. Still, philosophy is the fundamental need of men and women. There might be small differences between blacks, whites, Asians, but they're much, 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 much smaller than the difference between men and women.
Right. The differences between men and women are much more biological and fundamental and important. And we do see men and women responding in different ways to the ideas that they're exposed to the ideas presented to them on the menu that they grow up looking at and having to pick from. So I struggle to compare the difference in sex to the difference in race. I think the difference in sex is very real and very important. The difference in race, I think, is largely unimportant. We've seen guys like Thomas Sowell taking just the last remnants of individualism left. So a book he picked up at the library, and you see what Thomas Sowell is able to achieve. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me to say that genetics are an important determining factor when all is said and done. I could be wrong, but with today's intellectual landscape, I can't understand why an objectivist would take seriously the bell curve or any other sort of studies that are taken with human beings where the subject is not understood, the subject's consciousness and exposure to philosophy is not factored in.
Well, I'll just point to the experiments in Siberia with the gray foxes, and they found that the longer the ear, the longer the tooth, and the longer the jaw, the more aggressive the animal. The gene that linked the length of tooth, jaw, and ear, all those were linked to one gene, which was also the gene for aggression. So, if that's the case, and we could just say a background increase in aggression by 10 or 20% would cause a difference in society, then we might end up with two places like the Congo and Beijing, and we might make some comparison between them. Now, you're not Oriental. Do you lay awake at night worrying about what the Orientals are planning over there because they're better at math than us?
I'm a little bit Oriental. Look at me. Look.
So be it. You're an Oriental Jew. You're at the top then.
What's your question?
My question is, why should it worry you that the Oriental people are 15 points higher IQ on average than Europeans?
I'm saying it doesn't matter to me. And
Okay.
I'm not even sure they are, by the way, because if you were to conduct that study on the Japanese when they were, at a different stage of history, they would score much differently than they would currently. So I'm not sure that this disparity is even written in our DNA.
Well, wherever it's written, it seems to be real. I mean, people test for it over and over again. I mean, there's definitely the bell curve is real, but do you lay awake at night afraid of what they're planning over there because they have on average, they have a higher IQ? I mean, I don't think it really matters to our individual lives and what we do on a day-to-day basis.
No, it doesn't. But I mean, as a student of objectivism, I need to take issue with you emphasizing genetics when it's so clear to me, and it should be clear to anyone who looks at all of history and looks around the world today, that philosophy is the difference between a rational, happy life versus shooting up a school. And that philosophy leads to the political system that we live under, which in turn influences the psychology of the people living in that system, right? People will behave differently under government duress than they would in a free society. So,
So you think blacks would have been peaceful and assimilated and had a very low crime rate by now if it weren't for the war on poverty and the war on drugs?
More fundamentally, if it wasn't for postmodernism, Marxism, for various irrational ideas that have been pumped into their communities and pumped into their beliefs, and on top of that, add political policy, which seem to disproportionately affect black communities. But again, and on top of that, there are bad actors as well. There are people who are, who could do better, who are just going with the easier, softer way and following their urges. But the most important factor here at work is philosophy. So I do. It is my understanding. Well, I mean, look at blacks after the Civil War and leading up until the 70s or whenever. I mean, don't you see a lot of peaceful time? Are you saying they were just scared?
No, I don't know. I mean, they were under Jim Crow laws and stuff in the South, and under segregation and racism everywhere from California to Maine. So I don't know exactly how to judge the community under that situation. It was like 1940s when the U.S. Army started desegregating. That was like the beginning of desegregation. So, I don't know exactly what to say or how to judge it. I don't know what to think about it, except I know that on an individual level, philosophy is the prime mover. But people that have never heard of philosophy, they just accept the culture around them, and that seems to move whole cultures, whole societies.
Well, the culture around them is influenced by philosophy. The culture around them is moved by those that are intellectuals and that do think about ideas. Right? The intellectuals are the most important people in any culture.
So where's the civilization in Africa then? Where's the kingdoms? Where's the cities? Where's the
where was it in Greece before, before Athens? But like, where was it in Europe during the, before the birth of civilization? And where was it for hundreds of thousands of years?
It was in China before Europe. They had cities and stuff, but they didn't have. In my opinion, it was the lack of the alphabet that restricted their ability to conceptualize things properly. That's been a big break on their society, and you can see that they're very successful when they accept the English system. They do quite well. So I think their hieroglyphic system has held them back. But
okay,
I don't think that it's the ultimate answer to history, but definitely higher IQ leads to more Nobel Prizes, and Jews have more Nobel Prizes.
Higher IQ also led the Jews into the gas chambers, didn't it? I mean, high IQ led to unspeakable atrocities.
Yeah, and it's led to a very stale society in the Orient. So
what you do with your genetic lottery is really what matters, doesn't it? Like it's the interpretation of the world around you. It's the moral code that you follow, the epistemological standards that you use to discover things. So, like, yeah, we agree on this. I can't understand how you can take today's intellectuals seriously when they come up with, so-called facts involving human beings and they don't factor in philosophy. I think there's, I guess, the difference between us is the degree of importance that you attribute to things outside of philosophy.
Well, the fact that I attribute any importance to it at all, you mean? I mean, I don't attribute much importance to it. As a final note, I have to mention the epilogue in Opar. I'm sure you're familiar with this, the duel between Plato and Aristotle. It's only like 12 pages or something, and people who haven't read it should go read it. And it shows that every place that's advanced and doing okay in the modern world is Aristotelian, and every place that's garbage is Platonic. And so, Aristotle's philosophy is at the base of all of the success in the Orient, even. Sure, it's correct philosophy, but is the rest of it just, we can ignore it because philosophy is the final mover, therefore we can ignore everything else?
I mean, as an academic exercise, if you're interested in what's deeper than, like, what there is in addition to philosophy, fine, but I think it's so superficial to emphasize the influence of genetics when we can see that everyone around, we see 7, 8, or however many billion people all influenced by Plato. That Aristotle's influence seems to end at the science lab, and with a certain degree of respect for the individual in many of the political spheres, right? It's still somewhat like understood and respected, but we see Plato everywhere. So, I mean, the ominous parallels too, not just Opar or the dim hypothesis. We've got repeated demonstrations of how philosophy influences a culture. Why were Greeks, inventing philosophy and science at one point, and Greeks today, presumably their descendants, at least a bunch of them are, rioting for a higher minimum wage or whatever, or handouts or whatever they're rioting about over there.
Yeah, genetics is just a backdrop. The real mover is philosophy, which shows you why when you import Western philosophy into the Orient, they erupt into violence.
When you import Western, meaning the bad Western philosophies.
Yeah, and what they had before was a constant low-grade civil war, constant, for centuries. They had been oppressing each other for centuries.
Have you heard John Ridpath's lecture series on religion? I think there were maybe 2 to 4 different lectures. And at the beginning, he asks the audience, he asks them, tell me what you think. Which is worse, Western religions or Eastern religions? And with that, I think everyone voted for Western religions are worse, of course. Christianity, Islam, look at these, Then by the end of the lecture series, he describes how in studying this, he realized he was talking to one of his colleagues, and he was talking to his colleagues about how much worse the Western religions are because of how many people they've killed. And his colleague asked him, "What's this preoccupation with murder?" And Ridpath goes, "Excuse me?" And Ridpath is telling the story to point out that when you actually look at the influence of ideas, the Western religions are often leading people to kill one another, but the Eastern ones are getting people to commit suicide. The Eastern philosophies, or if you can call it philosophy, are giving us continents, countries full of people laying around waiting to die, depriving themselves of a life on Earth. So it doesn't surprise me that they're engaged in civil war, or that they're not. I mean, it doesn't surprise me that you've got people lighting themselves on fire as a means of protest and all types of misery and famine. So, I mean, philosophy is everywhere. Again, unless you're literally secluded and still in the hunter-gatherer phase. Of course, there's implicit ideas in their customs and the expectations they have one another, the way they're the way they're living. But I see philosophy everywhere. So I look at the Asians. I see philosophy maybe even more influential there than in Europe. I see it all as philosophical. It's very, very difficult for me to tell you what an Asian person might have been, but not for thousands of years of mystical, discombobulated bullshit, pre-Socratic type level philosophy that they've been upholding in that part of the world and in those families and among those people. It's very difficult for me to tell you what people might have been like, but I do believe ultimately the answer lies in philosophy and ideas.
Yeah, for sure, but people don't, they haven't had philosophies. They have had cultures it's not like everybody there believes in Confucianism. They have Confucius as one of their philosophers. They have a broad culture.
Yeah, they've got different influences too. They've got Buddha, they've got Tao and Duo and Dim, this, that, the yin yang, this, that, and the other. I mean, right? Like, they've got all types of yoga is probably a religion over there. They've got all types of influences, but these are influences.
Yeah, that's the background reality that we find ourselves in. A whole bunch of really, really violent stuff in Africa, some medium violent stuff in Europe with a lot of civilization, and a very, very unviolent Eastern world. Now, does genetics have anything?
Didn't you say that the Asians were involved in civil war until the Europeans showed up?
Yeah, low-grade, constant, over the centuries they've got the emperor and the coolies, and yeah, it's definitely not an objectivist society, but they're less violent than the Europeans, who are less violent than the Africans. So
what's this? I'll paraphrase Ridpath's colleague. What's this preoccupation with violence? We've got Indians wasting away for God knows how long, drowning their newborn daughters. We better count that as violence, at least chalk that. We've got people depriving themselves of all life has to offer in the name of what they believe to be the will of Vishnu or whoever the hell they're getting notes from. So I look at Africa, and I'm not an expert on Africa. I tend to think a lot of Africa is sort of pre-civilizational, and at this point, much of it is influenced by mercenaries and all types of media coming in. So it would be very difficult to kind of untangle that now. But a lot of what we see through the history of Africa is sort of like pre-civilizational. So yeah, yes, violent and tribal, but that doesn't mean it was written in their DNA. It means for one reason or another, they never had the emergence of science and philosophy. People in Greece did take that step. People in Europe were influenced by those steps taken. We celebrate the people who took those steps, right? We're not egalitarians that say, well, someone else would have come up with it anyway. No, we celebrate Homer, we celebrate Aristotle. And the Asian, when I look at the Asians, I see the influence of Eastern philosophy. So I don't look at these three different continents and say, oh, what a genetic difference there is. I think the genetic differences are largely unimportant when you compare to philosophy.
Well, yeah, if you invite them to America and they live on their own in America as individuals, philosophy becomes the only important factor. I mean, for sure.
Well, there's a lot wrong with American culture as well, and you see Asians and blacks, meaning not blacks of descendants of slave, but Nigerians or whatever coming to America and sometimes falling into very bad habits. I see the downfall of America, including the failure of many white people. I'm talking about these white men, the gamers, the raging nerds that you see posting on the internet all day. I see that as a consequence of philosophy as well. So, look, I mean, this is fascinating stuff. So, but again, like, there does seem to be a difference in the importance we put, the significance we attribute to philosophy when we look at human nature.
Well, I haven't. What have I said for implications for? I mean, you say that this is important or whatever. What implications have I said that I would practice with regard to this?
I didn't say you would practice it. I'm saying the assessment you're making of people in the world seems to way too heavily emphasize their genetics rather than the influence of philosophy. Am I wrong?
I think so. I mean, all I'm doing is I'm pointing out the lack of development in sub-Saharan Africa, the medium amount of development in Europe, and the maximum amount of peace in the Orient.
Again, what's this preoccupation with violence?
It seems like when you have no violence, you can build things.
Yes, but you could also have no violence, but people not lifting a finger to better their own life. You can have no violence, but a political system that forbids trading with people outside of your small village, like
Japan in the early 1800s.
The son of a bitch that everybody loves, Gandhi.
Right.
His ideas gave India 50 years of starvation and misery. I don't know if violence was a crucial characteristic of the culture at that time. Look, I think we've each made our point clear here, and I hope my position is clear here. I'm not aligning myself blindly with any objectivists. I think most objectivists flirt way too much with mainstream academia. I think a lot of today's objectivists, they take, they're way too cool with Jordan Peterson. They're way too cool with Sam Harris. They take the intellectual dark web seriously. I mean, it's embarrassing. That's not me. So no, it's not that I think it's not that I'm pushing you away or anything, or rejecting you to virtue signal to ARI or anything like that. I kind of see you and them as way too cozy with mainstream intellectuals. As many differences as maybe you and ARI have, to me, those differences are superficial compared to the one that I feel that I have with so many other objectivists, is that I don't think people appreciate the significance of philosophy when accepting data that comes out of universities and today's intellectual landscape. Even if we don't agree, I hope we've at least gotten some clarity on what each one of us holds, and that's of course helps the audience decide with who they agree with and what they think. But you said in your video that you posted, the meme on the thumbnail said, "Imagine objectivists, getting along," or something like that. I think this difference is important. I think giving serious attention to genetics without factoring in philosophy. I mean, these are two very, very different applications. And again, we haven't even come close to politics, which is, there's some very serious differences there as well.
Well, I would just use it to ask the question, should we open the borders and let millions of Africans into an erstwhile civilized country?
I don't know. I mean, wouldn't you say that most Africans that have come here voluntarily have been model citizens?
If you're talking about the African community today, you mean the one that's extremely violent and crime-ridden?
No. The ones that came here voluntarily, the Nigerians and stuff, aren't they very, very, they tend to be very into education and business and responsibility.
It seems like there's problems up in Milwaukee.
Okay. Oh, I mean, okay, fine. I was sort of, that was, I guess, a bit of a thought exercise there, but I don't really have a strong opinion on immigration. Like I said earlier, I think I understand the argument for closed borders, and this is not an important issue to me. Maybe it should be, but that's not where I see the difference between you and I. I think it seems that you look at American history for the last, 100 years or however much, and you see basically America as being a individualistic country when it comes to the Cold War and stuff like that. When it comes to our foreign policy, I see senseless altruism. I see incoherence in our foreign policy. And I think the ARI folks have done a pretty good job at pointing that out with books like Winning the Unwinnable War. And I think Ayn Rand did an excellent job in some of her lectures and essays with regards to the Vietnam War and even with regards to World War II. But it seems that when you talk, you're basically saying, what I'm hearing, I think, is there's the left and then everyone else is basically okay. But I just see recklessness all around.
No, I don't say they're okay. I say it's a big tent.
Okay.
And right now we've got people from the left who want to go home, back to the left, like Eric Weinstein. And they're on the right now because they've been chased out of the left with a stick. So
yeah, they have been, and they brought their anti-capitalist, anti-individualistic, anti-free will, just anti-objectivist, mainstream, basic bitch philosophy with them. And if you want to say, let's buy some time and align ourselves with people, and try to win the next election, fine. That's never been my contention about voting for Trump versus voting Democrat. My whole thing is I'm looking for clarity. Leonard Peikoff used to provide clarity. I think Charles too did as well when he was posting content. He looks at the landscape and he says, here's kind of the backstory of how the alt-right came to be. Here's the backstory where the SJWs came to be. That to me is something valuable right there. Like that allows me to understand what's taking place. But I'm not sure if you see it that way. I'm not sure if you are concerned by the philosophic differences. I mean, in your video to me the other day, you said, so you disagree with Jordan Peterson about one or two things, as though like minimizing the differences between Peterson and Rand. I mean, to me, these differences are enormous.
I have to say I don't recall saying such a thing. Now,
okay.
I'm up against the time here, Rucka. I got to go pick up my daughter from the bus stop. So if you want to have Chapter 2 either later today or in the coming days or week, then we should do that.
Okay.
I enjoyed this. We'll put it out there for the audience to look at. And I'm sorry I have to run, but my daughter will be waiting.
I understand. Well, anyway, glad we did this. Hopefully, you don't feel that I hate you or that I'm motivated by any sort of malicious intentions.
All right. Well, it's good to clear the air in that way then. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. I'll catch you later.
Have a good one. Thank you.
Peace.
There we are, ladies and gentlemen. I guess he doesn't hate me. We'll see. I don't know what that accomplished, what we've just done there. It seemed a little unsubstantive, but that'll have to be the chapter as it stands for now.